Thank you, Juli. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming and share with us this talk where we are going to explore a very interesting subject and I think a very practical one for our spiritual life. Before I begin, I want to say that I'm not a scholar in the I Ching and I don't know Chinese. What I'm going to share with you is part of my experience with this book, with this wisdom, and also I will try to show from the theosophical point of view some of the depth that this philosophy and this book in particular has. As you know, in the Theosophical Society, we try to research into these different philosophies, but not just simply studying the philosophies, but trying to add something else, trying to discover something else. So through comparison, through this trying to go deeper into the teachings, we can actually get to a new understanding. So that's more or less what we try to do here. And as any interpretation of any teaching, it's a way of looking at this wisdom. And there are several ways. So the Theosophical Society never says, this is the truth, or this is the way things should be interpreted. And whatever I'm sharing with you is part of my understanding and is not shared with any idea of authority. So each one of you will see how much this can be useful in your life. And also after the lecture, we are going to have the opportunity to share our own insights about all these subjects. So the I Ching is a very, very old book. It's one of the oldest classical books in China. It's one of the 5 classical, classical or basic books for the philosophy, the Chinese philosophy. And it means the word or the character I means changing, changes, or change, because in Chinese there is no difference between plural or singular. And Jing means book or classic. So this I Ching could be translated as the book of changes or the book of change. This is usually used by people, but by most people, as a book of divination. That means as a kind of oracle where you can ask a question and get an answer about what you are asking. But the book is more than that. It's really a book of wisdom. Even without asking anything, by reading the book, meditating on these words and images and metaphors, we can gain a lot of knowledge, spiritual knowledge, about how life works, how the universe develops, and about the nature of human beings. So it's not only something that we come to figure out what to do in a particular situation. It's something that really can enlighten our minds. And that's the focus of my talk today or tonight. It's trying to highlight this aspect of wisdom. Of course, I will explain briefly how to consult the I Ching using, the most common method that are the coins, but that will not be the central aspect of the talk, because you can find that information everywhere. On internet, you have in YouTube, for example, videos that they show you very clearly how to consult the I Ching, and also there are plenty of books and articles. So to understand the depth of this book, I think we could start by exploring the structure, how this book is structured. The basic figure that the I Ching is based on is a hexagram. A hexagram is a collection of 6 lines that are stacked one on top of the other. Now, this hexagram is composed by some other units. The smallest unit, what we could call the basic unit of these hexagrams, are lines which can be of 2 types. A divided line or an undivided line. These are the basic units of the hexagram. Now, these lines combine in different ways in units of 3 lines, which are called trigrams. Trigrams. Now, these trigrams represent fundamental principles or laws in nature. The trigrams, for example, represent heaven and earth, earth in the sense of the world, or they represent fire and water. They represent the shock and the placid, or the wind, or the fire. You know, all the basic principles. There are 8 different trigrams which come out of the combination of these 2 lines in groups of 3. And then the hexagram that we were talking about, it's a combination of these two of the trigrams. So, for example, we have these 6 lines which form the hexagram. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah. Thank you. So the hexagram. And there are 64 hexagrams which come from the combination of the different combinations of these trigrams. So the hexagram, as I said, is the basic element which the I Ching uses to convey the different situations we can be in. And according to the situation, there is some advice about how to act. Now, also, each one of these lines may have a particular meaning. We are going to see all this later. But that means that there are 384 lines, different lines with different meanings. And then there are 2 special situations where all the lines are changing. This is a particular situation that we are going to see later that has a different meaning. So there are 2 instances of this. So there are actually 386 different meanings that we can find in the I Ching. And several of them can combine also, creating more possibilities. Each one of these hexagrams has a name, a particular name, for example, the creative or the initial difficulty, different names. And they have a judgment or a decision which explains how the situation is, what is going on. They have also an image which is usually related to the trigrams. For example, earth, the trigram that represents earth may be on top of water. So we would say earth over water, and then there will be a description of that situation. Or clouds and thunder, and there is a description of that situation. That's the image. And then there is a description of the meaning of each one of these lines. For example, there is one of the hexagrams, as I said, is called difficulty at the beginning. And we have above the trigram that represents water, and below the trigram that represents thunder. So the judgment says, difficulty at the beginning works supreme success, furthering through perseverance. Nothing should be undertaken. It furthers one to appoint helpers. So this is talking about the difficulty that is always in every beginning, but this says that it's a situation where there is supreme success as a potentiality. Now, it says furthering through perseverance. That means we have to endure that and be persevering in whatever we are doing, but nothing should be undertaken. Generally, when something is beginning, it's kind of chaotic. So any premature motion on our part may spoil the process. So at this point in particular, nothing should be undertaken. It's more a state of expectancy where we are trying to understand what is going on and to let the universe work its own process. And it furthers one to appoint helpers. It depends on the situation. Sometimes the helpers are people that can help us. Sometimes it's our own virtues or our higher self. You know, as we are going to see, all this is very symbolic, and that is why it can be applied to all kinds of situations. So that would be the judgment. Then the image says clouds and thunder. You know, these clouds are like come from water. Remember the two trigrams of this hexagram are thunder and water. So this is clouds and thunder, the image of difficulty at the beginning. Thus, the superior man brings order out of confusion. So the image is like in a storm where everything is confused, and the superior man, which means here again, man, woman, all these figures are just symbols. So the superior man means our higher self, and it brings order out of confusion. So the idea is that through this period, we have to try to shape the situation, to bring order out of the confusion that is there. And then we have different lines which may or may not apply to our particular situation. But for example, I want to give you an example of this so you get the sense. For example, one of the lines, the third line, changing lines means, whoever hunts deer without a guide only loses his way in the forest. The superior man understands the signs of the time and prefers to desist. To go on brings humiliation. So in this particular line, it is saying that we don't have the vision to understand what is going on. So what we should do is to keep quiet and to wait, because if we try to lead, then we are going to be lost. If we let life take the lead, then we can go in harmony with the situation. So this is one particular example. You have examples that are the opposite, where the hexagram will say, cross the great waters, do something or otherwise you will be lost. So it depends on the particular situation. But all these hexagrams have referred to different things. Some of them represent universal laws and principles, like the creative or the receptive. Sometimes the situation we are in is full of creative energy. Sometimes the situation has no energy at all, and it's a standstill point. Or then there are some hexagrams talking about processes, like, for example, evolution, increase, decrease, development. Some other hexagrams talk about social activities like the marrying maiden, the clan. Some other hexagrams talk about individual traits like modesty, grace. So there are all kinds. There are a couple of hexagrams that talk about objects like the well and the cauldron. So there are different hexagrams. Now, before we start trying to go deeper into the philosophy, let me talk a little about the origin of the book. It is very difficult to talk about the origin of these ancient books because there is very little information. So from a scholarly point of view, they develop their theories based on proofs. And proofs in this kind of researches are usually based on archaeological findings or ancient texts or things like that. And you know that with archaeological findings, there may be a lot underneath, under the earth that we don't know, and we have to create a theory based on the little or the few information that we have based on the findings that we have so far. So when you see the theories about the antiquity of the books like the I Ching, they change a lot. And a theory that is saying something today may be completely overthrown by one single finding tomorrow. So it's really difficult to determine what is true or not in this case. But that's an intrinsic limitation in this kind of research. So far, or as far as I am aware of, the scholars are saying that this book began to develop during the Shang dynasty, which developed from the 1700s to the 1100s BCE, so long ago. It seems that the first trigrams began to develop there. The lines, the undivided lines and the divided lines come from antiquity. We don't know when they were generated. But this arrangement in threes seems to have begun more or less, as I said, 1100 years ago or BCE or more. Then during more or less 1,000 years, this book was developing. In the meaning for the trigrams was added, then the idea of the hexagrams was added, then the meaning for the hexagrams and for one of each line was added also. So it underwent an evolution for more or less 1,000 years. And it is thought that the book, more or less as we know it now, was finally developed during we have in the dynasties of China, we have the Shang dynasty, then the Zhou dynasty, and then at the end of the Zhou dynasty, we have the Han era, and probably the book was completed during this period of the Han era, which is more or less 200 years BC until 200 years BC. So for 1,000 years, it was developing little by little. That means that this book has been in this process or has been with us for about 3,000 years, which is a lot for a book. 3,000 years it's a lot. And in this process, many schools and thinkers added different elements. So the book wasn't produced by one particular person. In fact, there are 4 names that are the main names related to the origin of the I Ching. One is Wooji, who was a semi-human divine emperor, the first emperor in China, and he is supposed to be the first one in having discovered the trigrams. He says that he saw the trigrams on the back of a tortoise when it was coming out of the Yellow River, which is one of the main rivers in China. Then the King Wen, he was he's a hero in China, and he was the first emperor of the Zhou dynasty, and he was imprisoned under false charges by the last Shang emperor, and while in prison, he began to combine the trigrams and to give them a name and a particular meaning. Then his son, the Duke of Zhou, he developed a meaning for each one of the lines. And finally, Confucius and some Taoist teachers added some commentaries to these lines, to each one of these elements, which are called the wings, the 10 wings. So we have today in the I Ching these main elements, the name, the judgment, the image, and the lines, but we have also an explanation of each one of these elements, which helps us understand the images and the metaphors, which were added later by different schools of thought. And that's what we have today. The traditional story says that this all began 5,000 years ago, that Wooji lived 5,000 years ago. So anyway, 5,000 years, 3,000 years is a very long time in our scale of time. You know, we know almost nothing about humanity 5,000 years ago. So that it's about the origin, and the idea is that, as you see in the traditional story, they say that, for example, King Wen, he began to organize the hexagrams, but it's not that he did it just out of his mind. These people are supposed to be sages that were able to understand the underlying principles of nature. So what they were doing, they were finding a way to convey in a visible manner these underlying principles which most normal people cannot perceive because they don't have the spiritual perception developed. So the idea is that this book didn't come out of an intellectual endeavor, but out of a spiritual perception. Now, one of the main philosophical foundations of the I Ching is the concept of polarity. You will see in the book that this polarity is the very foundation of the book. You will find constantly references to opposites, the creative and the receptive, masculine and feminine, dark and light, high and low, firm and yielding. All over the book, things are classified in one of these two opposites. And these opposites come from two primordial forces, which are the yin and yang, that probably most of you have heard of. We don't know where this concept of yin and yang comes. Today it's all over the Chinese philosophy, but it is thought that there was a particular school that developed this concept, though we don't have any text or the names of any of the teachers. Some people say that the school was actually the one that developed the I Ching. The idea of these two forces, it's a very interesting one, because they are not opposite in the sense of being contrary forces. You know, we have the idea of good and evil. They are opposite forces. They show a kind of dualism between where things are completely different, spirit and matter. Usually in Western thoughts, we consider those things as different. Now, the idea of the yin and yang, these are forces that work together, they complement together. They are not good or evil. For example, yang is usually described as strong, active, light, and yin is described as weak, dark. Sometimes devotion is associated with yin. And it's not that these qualities are good or bad, because in some situations you need to be receptive. You need to have a weak attitude. In some other situations you need to be strong, to be commanding, to be forceful. So the idea of yin and yang is not that there is something that is intrinsically good or bad. What is good or bad depends on the context. It's relative. So some attitude, some quality is good in certain situation and is wrong in certain other situations. So they are very dynamic. And this makes the person to be flexible, because it's difficult to put fast rules. You cannot say this is good and this is bad. And this is actually also how Theosophy sees the idea of good and evil. From the Theosophical point of view, good and evil are all relative. For example, selfishness, we could say, well, selfishness is not something good. But it depends. In a baby or in a child, it is necessary to develop a sense of selfishness. Otherwise, that person cannot develop a sense of I-ness, which later can be healthy or unhealthy. It will be unhealthy if that selfishness goes on and is still there when it shouldn't be there. So everything depends on what is the situation to say if a particular attitude is good or is not good. And for example, even in evolution, cosmic evolution, probably most of us would think that the aim of cosmic evolution right now is to become more spiritual. And that is what Theosophy says. But there was a point in the universe, in the universal evolution, where the aim was to become material. And actually, there is in the Secret Doctrine is a book that Blavatsky, one of the founders of the Theosophical Society, wrote, and she explains the development of human beings. And in the Secret Doctrine, it is said that there were some highly spiritual beings that were supposed to incarnate to take human bodies, and they refused because they didn't want to become material. They wanted to be spiritual. And that was wrong, and that generated some karmic problems. So you can see how things are relative according to where the universe is going. So the idea of good is anything that goes with the universal motion. And anything that goes against the universal motion is wrong. So that's the idea of yin and yang. This right and wrong is relative, and it requires a lot of wisdom to determine when some attitude is right or is wrong. They have, with this idea of the polarity, the Chinese philosophy develops a theory of how the universe comes about. So we were talking about this polarity of yin and yang. But before that, there is a state that is symbolized by an empty circle, which is called Wooji, and this is a state of unity. But it's a pre-cosmic state. This state is beyond creation, let's say. This is a state that is beyond our thoughts, is beyond our comprehension. In this state, there is no differentiation. There is no dark and light, there is no self and non-self, everything is one. So this is called Wooji. So from this state of unity, they say motion begins inside this state of unity, and then we have a polarization in this unity, which is the typical symbol of yin and yang that most of you must know. This is called Tai Chi. At this point, there is, like, the polarity is there, but it's not separated. It's integrated. It's probably like in an atom, you have the nucleus of the atom that is positive and the electron around that is negative, but the atom is neutral unless you separate the electrons from the nucleus. So there is a polarity, but it's neutral. Then from this comes the actual separation of yin and yang, and this is the first duality. It is said that this Tai Chi is the origin of the universe. This is the first principle that you can think of as being the origin of the universe. Wooji is beyond our thoughts. So then they say, to this is added another line, another force. So we have, for example, these dyadas, and all the combinations of these dyadas are the following. You may have one that is yin and yin again, or yin and yang. Then you have a yang and a yin again, or yang and yang. So here you have, this is a pure yin, pure passive. This is called the great yin. And the other extreme is the great yang. Then you have here a yin that now has a yang. So that's called the lesser yang. It's an intermediate state. And the opposite here, the lesser yin. So this could be like day, night, sunrise, and sunset. Or cold, hot, cool, and warm. Or north, south, east, and west. So this gives origin to, little by little, to this gradual change. And then if you add, let us take one of them, if you add another line, you get the trigrams. So for example, if to this one you add a yang, you have the mountain, this is called the mountain, or you have this that is pure yin, which is called the earth. So from these four elements, you get 8 trigrams, and then when you combine the trigrams, as I said, you have the hexagrams. And there are 64 hexagrams. There are 8 trigrams and 4 of these dyadas. So that's how they explain the development of this diversity from the unity. Now, the other concept that is very important is a concept of change. The idea is that these lines, yin and yang, are constantly changing, one into the other. In fact, for the concept of yin and yang came originally from the sunny side and the shady side of a mountain. So the idea is that as the sun goes through the sky, the shady and the sunny sides of the mountain change. So yin and yang also change, and with them the whole universe. Now this is a very important concept because they say this change is, you cannot prevent the change. That's the only thing that doesn't change. And therefore, we have to learn the rules to be able to go through these changes in the right way. Because the opposite, in Chinese, the opposite word to change is not rest. There is not so much an idea of rest. The opposite to change is degeneration, or something that retrogrades, that goes against. So the idea of this change is a kind of evolutionary change. And the opposite is when we go against evolution. So the whole idea in the I Ching is that we have to learn how to go along with the change, instead of going against the change. So for example, you have in Hexagram 11, which is called peace, you have everything on earth is subject to change. Prosperity is followed by decline. This is the eternal law on earth. Evil can indeed be held in check, but not permanently abolished. It always returns. This conviction might induct melancholy, but it should not. It ought only to keep us from falling into the illusion when good fortune comes to us. So, in Western countries, we always seek for everlasting happiness, for unchangeable peace, for non-stop success. And this philosophy says that's impossible. And it's not that it's a pessimistic philosophy. Actually, I think we all can see that this is true. I don't think there is a single human being, unless the person is enlightened, that can say that that could attain an everlasting state of peace or happiness. Always there is this constant change. And what this philosophy says is, if you don't realize that, it will only end in frustration on your part and an inability to go through life in the right way, because you are going to be constantly resisting the processes that are universal. So the wise thing to do is to learn about these changes and to know how to go with them, as I said. So another hexagram says, he is well aware that everything earthly is transitory, and that a descent follows upon every rise, but need not be confused by this universal law of fate. Everything serves to further. So even the processes of difficulties, of decay, the negative aspects, serve to further our spiritual evolution, if we know how to go through them. So it's not that life has good things and bad things. Everything could be good. Not everything could be pleasant, but everything could be good depending on our own attitude. And we know that we learn many times more from difficult situations than from easy situations. We enjoy the easy situations and we learn and grow with the difficult ones. Now, the idea is that if we learn about these laws, we can learn how to manipulate them. I don't like the word manipulate, but in a philosophical way. For example, we know about the law of gravity. So according to the law of gravity, everything is down here on Earth. But if we learn about the laws of the aerodynamics laws, for example, we know how to handle the law of gravity and how to make things fly. We are not breaking the law of gravity, but we know other laws and we know how to manipulate them to be able to do something that is even against the laws or seems to be against the laws. So the same from a spiritual point of view. If we know about these laws, we know how to go beyond fate. So for example, the hexagram on peace again says, if we continue mindful of the danger, we remain persevering and make no mistakes. As long as a person's inner nature remains stronger and richer than anything offered by external fortune, as long as he remains inwardly superior to fate, fortune will not desert him. And then Hexagram 63, after completion, says, at the beginning, good fortune. At the end, disorder. Here we have a rule indicating the usual course of history, but this rule is not an inescapable law. He who understands this law is in a position to avoid the effects by an unremitting perseverance and caution. So this is the idea. There will be always change in our life, but we can learn how to go through the changes with a sense of purpose, so that we can use everything to improve our spiritual development and our relationship with people around. And this is also very important because as we learn about these laws, as we learn how to go through life in an intelligent way, we may become a constructive force in the universe instead of a destructive force. So this is something that has not only an effect on us, but has an effect on everybody around. So before I go a little more into the philosophy of the I Ching, let me talk about how to the right attitude to consult the I Ching. One of the easiest methods is to consult the I Ching with coins. There are 3 coins. Some of the one side of the coins has a value of 3. The other side has a value of 2. So you have one that has the value of 2, and you have another side that has the value of 3. You have 3 coins, so they may fall 2, 2, 3, in which case if you add the values, you will have 7. Or it could be 3, 3, 2, you have 8. Or it could be 2, 2, 2, you have 6, all on the same side. Or 3, 3, 3, you have 9. These lines where you have all the coins on the same side, which are extremes, between 7 and 8, they are called changing lines. These 2. So the even numbers are yin lines, and the uneven numbers, or odd numbers, are yang lines. And you build the hexagram from bottom to top. So you throw the coins, you may get 6, 7, 9, 9, 6, 8. So then you translate that as a yin, yang, 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 yin, yin. And these that are extreme are changing lines. So you mark these as special lines because they have a particular meaning in the book. So you mark with a cross the changing yin line, and with a circle the changing yang line. So then you go see this particular hexagram, and in this case you read the meaning of these lines also. Now, before to consult the I Ching could be an act of superstition in a person that does not have the right frame of mind, or can be a very intelligent act. In fact, very intelligent people use the I Ching, like Confucius, which is one of the greatest philosophers in the world, and he and his school had the I Ching in the highest regard. But it could be also an act of superstition if we just think that the book magically is going to tell us what to do. The idea is that as we throw the coins, these coins, I don't know if this is a Chinese idea. This is how I interpret this. But the coins, when we throw the coins, they get like impregnated by the universal motion that is at that moment. And when they fall, they are like a visible reflection of that motion. In more theosophical terms, we talk about elementals. Elementals are like subtle energies in nature. And everything that we do has to do with elementals. I don't want to go too much into this subject. But the idea is also that some kinds of oracles are associated with different kinds of elementals. They can be more or less evolved. These energies can be more or less evolved. Blavatsky said that the elementals associated with the I Ching are very good because the book is so philosophical that during history it was used pretty much in a serious way. It wasn't used to do wrong things, because you will find always very positive spiritual advice, so it's difficult to use it for the wrong things. But whenever we are going to ask a question, the idea is that the question should be something that is not trivial, something that is not something we can figure out by thinking about that. Of course, it shouldn't be a casual question. I read once that there was an emperor that all his family had the I Ching, as in very high esteem, and somebody asked him, "So your family is very famous for, having the I Ching so well regarded?" "Oh yeah, my family is very much attached to the I Ching." "And so how frequently do you ask something to the I Ching?" And he said, "I think we asked one question in the last 400 years. So the idea is that, we should be very respectful with this. Now, sometimes we are going through difficult times where we really need guidance, and we can ask, if we are honest, we can ask more frequently, but never like as a game, because what we do is that when we don't take it seriously, a different set of elementals, of energies, begin to work on the process, and the lower the energies, the less accurate the result. So if we are really respectful with the I Ching, then we will have very accurate, answers. And then the answers, you will see, they are not answers of yes, no, do this, do that. As we have seen in the things that I read, they are very philosophical. So your answers should be more of open questions. What should my attitude be in this situation for everything to go on in the right way? Or how should I face this particular situation? Open questions where you can really have a deep kind of advice. Also, it is usually better if you can ask the question with a calm mind. Many times we are in distress and you need something, and it's difficult to get to a calm mind, but it always helps. Now, if we are earnest, all these external limitations have no much meaning. If we are earnest, it doesn't matter how well we frame the question or what our inner state is, we will have the right answer. But all these things help, to try to be calm, to try to get to a point of impersonality as far as possible so that we don't push the result. And to try to be serious about taking this advice. Many people, they don't like the advice, so they ask again the question in a little different way. And although things work at the level of the elementals, and they go in, against your own practice. But if you are serious, you can still question what comes as an answer, because you are the responsible for the action. So it's not that you should follow blindly whatever the I Ching says. In my own experience, even when I didn't think like what the I Ching said, I said, okay, I will be cautious, and almost every time the I Ching was right, and my perception wasn't right. So, if you see things different, well, try to be honest with yourself, but also keep this advice like coming from a person that is wise. You say, well, yeah, but I think things are this way, and I will try this way, but I will keep in mind what you say and be alert to see if finally what you say is right. At certain point, as I said, I don't argue anymore with I Ching. I know that the I Ching is usually right. But all these things are important when you are going to ask a question. And as I said, even if you don't use the I Ching to ask a question, you can just read the hexagrams. And there is a lot of deep philosophy that you can get from meditating on the hexagrams. So there are several translations. One of the most reliable ones is the one that Wilhelm produced. He was German. The problem is that the translation was in German, and then it is Chinese, German, German, English, and sometimes English, Spanish in our country, so forth. But still, it's a very good translation. It's very philosophical. Sometimes it's difficult to get the meaning. With the interpretations, you have always this problem. Either the interpretation is right to the point, concrete, or is very philosophical. If it is concrete, then it's not very flexible. You get a clear interpretation which not necessarily applies to your particular situation. A more philosophical and metaphorical interpretation is easier to say something about any situation that falls under that hexagram. But it's more difficult to understand. So usually you could get this translation and an easier one and read both. So you get more or less the sense of the concrete and the abstract. And when you read, try to get the sense of the hexagram or the sense of whatever you are reading there. Not so much the words, because the words are limited. So try to see what is the general attitude that the hexagram is saying. Should you be active or passive? Should you do this or that? In general terms, don't get too stuck in the words. Sometimes the words are just perfect, and the only thing that is missing there is your name and saying, hey, do this. Sometimes but some other times you have to get the sense of the general atmosphere of the hexagram and apply it to your life. And don't get lost in words. This book was written during the Zhou dynasty of China that was very patriarchal. So women are usually depicted in very subservient attitudes. And don't get too stuck in that. Try to understand what the universal principle is. Many times when there is a woman there, it represents a yielding attitude, an attitude of devotion, a more, so even if you are a man or a woman, it doesn't matter if it talks about, one gender or the other. Try to get to the universal principle behind it. Well, there are a lot of interesting things, but we have come to our time, so we can discuss I like to discuss some things, share with you in the question and answer. So we can stop here, and if you want to share something or to ask something, the microphone is there so that people on the internet also can hear the question. And let us have some interchange of ideas.
Have you ever tried the Yarrow method? I heard it's supposed to be more accurate, but I don't have the patience to really learn it. It seems confusing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's long. It's once you get the process is repeated several times. So it may seem confusing at the beginning, but then you learn the steps, and these are like 3 basic steps that are repeated. The problem is that it's quite long, and there are more possibilities to get a changing yang line, which would be the 9, than getting a changing yin line. So at the level of possibilities, it's not 50-50 like in the coins. It actually doesn't necessarily mean that that will influence the result. If we really believe that there is another, force that is behind, then it doesn't matter much, this question of the possibilities. Some people like it because it's more connected to nature than coins that are man-made. But personally, I never tried it. I usually use the coins. Although it's interesting. I know more or less how to do it, but I haven't tried. Is there anything from the internet?
To make this clearer, could we try one?
Right now? I didn't bring the coins. Well, if you want, I didn't want to spend too much time in how to, but if you want, we can try it, sure. I think there are some coins coming. I got the coins. She got the coins.
Not that I use them all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, we don't need to ask a question. Just let us, see. Just throw this and.
But that's true too. You don't have to ask a specific question. Can't you do
The microphone.
in general?
Isn't it true that you don't have to ask a specific question about a specific situation? Can't you just say, ask for wisdom or insight into the day, or something more general?
Yeah, you can do something general. The danger in that is, to fall into the attitude of asking as a game, But at the same time, there are times where we really feel, either we feel stuck or we feel that something is going on without any particular situation. Or sometimes at the beginning of the year, you could ask, what is a general attitude that I should have during this year, for example? So you can do that. And sometimes it happened to me that I asked a particular question, and the answer had nothing to do with that question, but had all to do with the situation. When I read that, I realized that the problem was not what I was asking. The problem was what the I Ching was saying there. So that also happens. It's always better if you frame a more or less clear question, but all these rules can be overruled by the I Ching itself. So for example, you have the 3 coins. So after, I usually sit and for a couple of minutes or 5 minutes and try to calm down my mind and try to get to a point where I don't long for any particular result, so that my mind is not interfering in the process. But sometimes you can't do it. So try to adopt a humble attitude and say, okay, just help me with with this attitude of, I want to do the right thing, even if it's not what I would really like to do. But if we understand life, we discover that always the right thing is what will bring happiness in the end. Many times we want to do something, and sometimes we get to do it, and that turns into a source of suffering. So little by little, we learn that really the right thing is the only thing that will bring happiness in the long term. So after a time of quietness, you just throw the coins. So in this case, we had all the yang side, the number 3. So we have 9. So now this is 8. I'm adding 3, 3, 2. If you want, do you want to come? Yeah. I don't know what the elementals may be thinking right now, but 3, 3, 2. Anybody? Paula is running to the stage.
Oh, we want the whole group.
Sure. 2, 2, 7. Anybody else? If the coin stays like this, you have to throw again. That's fine. Well, something similar happened. 2, 2, 7. And the last one, the line of the sage. It is said that the last line represents the sage. So, okay, we have our sage. Yeah. Each line represents different things also. Okay, 8, 3, 3, 2. So, yeah, the first one is changing. So now we build the hexagram. So we have these 2 trigrams, and this is a changing line. So the first thing that we do is to look, usually in the books, you have like a chart where you can see the lower trigram, which is divided, divided, and undivided, which is Chen here, and then the upper. So let me look, Chen and Tui. Yeah, 17. Mm-hmm. So 17, this is one of my favorites. Work on what has been spoiled. So the first thing that says, you have the hexagram and says above, keeping still. No, this is not the keeping still. Oh, 18. Yeah, because this is not the mountain. Oh, it's not. Okay, it's following. So above the lake, the joyous, and below the arousing, the thunder. So we have the joyous and the arising or the shock. So it says the trigram Tui, the joyous, whose attribute is gladness, is above. Chen, the arousing, which has the attribute of movement, is below. Joy in movement induces following. The joyous is the youngest daughter, while the arousing is the eldest son. An older man defers to a young girl and shows her consideration. By this, he moves her to follow him. So the man here is like the active aspect, the commanding force. And the girl is like the passive or the inferior. So in this particular hexagram, you have the joyous above the thunder, which has energy. This means that the energy, the active energy in the situation, instead of overpowering, or instead of trying to go over the weak element, shows consideration for the weak element. And therefore, the weak element naturally follows the strong element. Because as we are going to see in this hexagram, it says at some point, well, maybe it's in one of the lines that we don't have, but it says, when you impose something by force, you may get a following, but it's not a genuine following. That following will disappear as soon as the situation allows it. But when you go through a gentle attitude, you arouse the love in the hearts of men, and they follow you out of this inspiration, out of this love. So this is the idea of this hexagram. The strong element is gentle, and because of that, the weak element follows. So the judgment says following has supreme success. Perseverance furthers, no blame. And then there is an explanation, which is one of these wings that I was talking about. It's an added text to the judgment. It says, in order to obtain a following, one must first know how to adapt oneself. If a man would rule, he must first learn how to serve. For only in this way does he secure from those below him the joyous ascent that is necessary if they are to follow him. If he has to obtain a following by force or cunning, by conspiracy or by creating factions, he invariably arouses resistance, which obstructs willing adherence. But even joyous movement can lead to evil consequences. Hence, the added stipulation, perseverance furthers. That is, consistency in doing the right. So in this attitude of not being too forceful, it doesn't mean that we should do something that is wrong. We have to keep doing what is right, but with gentleness. Just as we should not ask others to follow us unless this condition is fulfilled, so it is only under this condition that we can in turn follow others without coming to harm. The thought of obtaining a following through adaptation to demands of the time is a great and significant idea. This is why the appended judgment is so favorable, because it talks about success. And this could be about anything, about a relationship, about our attitude in a difficult situation, about our attitude in our job. It's usually better to ask for things that have to do with our spiritual or psychological life, not so much for material reasons. But many times what is going on in our jobs really affects our spiritual life, so to say. So then the image. The image, remember, works with these two, the meaning of the trigrams. So thunder in the middle of a lake, the image of following. Thus the superior man at nightfall goes indoors for rest and recuperation. So the explanation is, in the autumn, electricity withdraws into the earth again and rests. Here it is thunder in the middle of the lake that serves as the image. Thunder is is in its winter rest, not in motion. Because remember that we are saying the strong element is not very active, is trying to be condescending with the weak. So this thunder is inside the earth or inside the lake, not in motion. The idea of following in the sense of adaptation to the demands of the time grows out of the image. Thunder in the middle of the lake indicates times of darkness and rest. Similarly, a superior man, after being tirelessly active all day, allows himself for rest and recuperation at night. No situation can become favorable until one is able to adapt to it and does not wear himself out with mistaken resistance. So overall, it's a situation of being more passive than active. And then the lines, this is the overall situation. And the lines, if they are changing, we read that particular line, and that means that is like a more particular piece of advice that we get for the situation. If there are no changing lines, that means that the situation is stable, and that's it. But when there is a changing line, this line will change into a yin line, this yang one, and that will bring to a different hexagram. So there is some energy in the situation that will lead to a change. So the line says 9 at the beginning, remember that we went this way, means the standard is changing. Perseverance brings good fortune. To go out of the door in company produces deeds. Usually the lines represent the progress in the situation. The first line is the beginning of the situation. This particular energy is beginning to operate. Or if we are at the end, that means that the situation is about to end. That's the usual rule, but there are some other ways to see this. So the explanation says, there are exceptional conditions in which the relation between a leader and a follower changes. Usually the follower follows the leader, but we are in an exceptional condition here. It is implicit in the idea of following and adaptation that if one wants to lead others, one must remain accessible and responsive to the views of those under him. At the same time, however, he must have firm principles so that he does not vacillate where there is only a question of current opinion. So we have to be accommodating, but without going out of the right course of action. Once we are ready to listen to the opinion of others, we must not associate exclusively with people who share our views or with members of our own party. Instead, we must go out and mingle freely with all sorts of people, friends or foes. That is the only way to achieve something. So this talks about an openness and really consider the situation from different point of views and not only from our point of view. So that's an example. And you see it's very philosophical. And if you are sincere, these things are really telling you how to deal with the situation. And maybe, this is a situation where you are in a state of uncertainty and you would like to do something. You are waiting for something to happen, and so you are wondering, should I go and talk to this person or should I take the lead? And then you get this that says, no, wait, be, reserve. And you say, I don't want this. Well, but probably, this is what you have to do. So,
Pablo, with all these changes, then the end result is actually balance. When it goes through a whole, it's not just one way to do it, but it builds up to balance, I guess. Is that the idea?
Yeah. Yes. I think the idea of change has to do with evolution, with growing, with progress. And many times our main problem is that we are not balanced. In one of the Theosophical books, the Mahatma Letters, one sage says, evil is the exaggeration of good. So even something that is good, if we go over the top, becomes evil. So we see many times that in life. The problem is that it's difficult to know what the middle path is, which is more or less what this hexagram was saying. We have to be accommodating, but at the same time, we don't have to, do something that is wrong. So we have to persist in our course, but without being forceful. So how do you get to that balance? So balance is usually a key element in our development.